For TRICHOMES.com, I'm Jesse Betend, and this is The High Ground. On this show, we feature leaders of the cannabis industry. We talk to everyone from farmers to CEOs and public officials, anyone making an impact on the cannabis community and beyond. As of 2021, Richard Delesi holds the record for the longest prison sentence served by an American for a cannabis-related offense. In December of 2020, Richard, who was serving a 90-year prison sentence, was finally released at the age of 72. Chiara Juster is one of the attorneys that represented Richard in his case. And how Chiara came to be representing Richard is actually an interesting part of the story as well. Before Chiara was representing one of the most well-known cannabis prisoners in American history, Chiara was working as a prosecutor in Florida, where she says she was often required to hand out sentences that she didn't agree with. Eventually, it got so bad that on her way into work, Chiara says she often found herself in tears. So I decided to call her up to find out more about her work and how she came to be representing Richard, but also what Richard's case means for the future of criminal justice as it relates to the cannabis industry. Chiara, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's an absolute pleasure. I'm really looking forward to it. And there's a lot that I want to talk to you about. But the big news was Richard Delesi, who is, I believe, the longest serving cannabis prisoner in the United States, was finally released. Can you tell me a little bit more about Richard and how you first came to find out about his case?
Well, absolutely. Yeah. Richard Delesi was the longest serving nonviolent cannabis offender incarcerated in the United States. He has now been decarcerated. I found out about Richard from Sarah Gersten, the executive director of Last Prisoner Project. I'd reached out to LPP in the past and let them know that if they ever had a case in Florida or the District of Columbia, I'd be happy to assist. When I found out about Richard's case, my license was inactive in Florida at that very moment. I'd retired from Florida and thought I'd only, if I practice, it would only be in DC. But I immediately teamed up with some great pro bono attorneys, and it was a stellar team who really cared about Richard and his family, as well as all of those who are incarcerated for under really unjust terms, because Richard was given a 90-year sentence for nonviolent cannabis offenses. So it was really nice to be able to work with people who felt similarly that this was a true injustice, miscarriage of justice, and that not only Richard, but his children and his family were really suffering. In addition, Richard is 72. He has a lot of pre-existing conditions that put him in the higher risk for serious complications were he to contract COVID. So we were really worried every day that 90 years, which was never right, and which really it was a death sentence, was going to bring an end to him, as it had so many other people in his prison in South Florida.
Wow. Well, let's go back to the beginning and talk perhaps even before the 90-day sentence, which you've called unjust. What is Richard's story? How did he come to be involved in the justice system and embroiled in this really life-changing thing?
Well, Richard grew up in Breezy Point, New York, which is really a tight-knit community in Queens. The friends he had as a child stuck by him his whole life. When Richard was a child, he still has dyslexia, but when he was younger, they didn't know what that was, and he never learned to read or write. But when he was in his 40s, he actually learned how to read or write, and write with the help of a friend of his, a friend named Ted Feimer, who had a memory of Richard in parochial school around the age of 6, being disciplined and screaming out because he really couldn't follow the instructions. He couldn't read when he was instructed to, and he sometimes diverted attention from that fact. Richard and his family considered those around them family. If you became a friend of a DeLisi, you were considered family, which really became a lot to support eventually as they moved from New York to Florida, where they had an auto body shop, Highland Auto Body Shop. And at Highland, Richard, I've heard from time and time again from people he really helped out there, who he would give a car to so they could drive up to New York every weekend to see their child, because he believed in the importance of family. Richard, unfortunately, was part of a cannabis trafficking case, which was the first RICO case in the state of Florida back in around 80, 81. And
what does that mean exactly for people who don't know?
Racketeering influence corruption organization. So basically part of a big group of people who are all pulled in basically through conspiracies to part of a larger organization. So along with that came asset forfeiture. So he lost everything except the struggling then auto body shop. So when he came out, after a year, he was essentially trolled by an informant to get involved, and one last time, pay off your debts, blah blah blah. And to make a long story short, there was law enforcement cannabis involved in this, not anything that Richard, picked up or flew or anything like that. And it was, 1,500 pounds. That's not a lot. In today's regulated eyes, but even then, the DeLisis really set themselves apart from a lot of other people in South Florida at the time by refusing to participate in anything that had to do with harder substances and the accompanying violence. So cocaine obviously is much easier to traffic. I was a prosecutor in Miami-Dade County. If you're going to be trafficking drugs, cannabis is definitely not the best one. From a business perspective, from a law enforcement perspective, it's big and bulky. But they really were peaceful guys. And that continued. In prison, Richard, as well as his brother Ted, who received 90 years as well, but successfully appealed the conspiracy conviction and was released after, my goodness, he was released about 7 years ago. So they in prison worked every day to help those around them, as they had on the outside in a different way. But Richard started a program to teach fellow inmates how to read and write phonetically, because that's what had worked for him. And Richard was in the faith-based dorm before he was released, and he misses his friends there. They shared a true belief in a higher authority, and that really helped them keep a positive attitude. But
is that something that he said to you, that he misses his friends?
Yeah, it's hard because he can't, his roommate helped take care of him. Richard is 72. When you're in prison, you're considered, and 72, by the way, is not old. Like, I'm not trying to, but if you're in prison and you're considered elderly at 55, kind of is old, especially when you're using a walker and have had back surgery and other surgeries and have COPD and, a lot of other conditions. It's tough. So he had people who looked out for him because he was a peaceful old guy. How can I really am one of the people who I really care about our elders. I don't, pre-pandemic, I would hold the hand of a stranger to help them across the street, and always offer to get things off of shelves. Like, I don't know. I really love learning from those who know so much more. And I feel like we need to look out for them. So it's nice to know that in prison, some people feel the same and look out for our elders and help make sure they don't slip and fall in many ways. But yeah, when you're used to being around people and all of a sudden you're not, it's only natural that you'd miss your friends.
Now, you mentioned that you are a former prosecutor, and there are a couple aspects of that I'd like to ask you about. But the first one that I feel like I have to ask, you also said that Richard's story involves a police informant. And so I wonder, as a former prosecutor, if you ever came across a case that you were involved with where the police were using some sort of a sting operation or an informant to perhaps entice someone to commit an illegal act. Like, how did you view that as a prosecutor? And was your mind changed by seeing how that worked out in action?
I think that I'm not opposed to informants across the board, but I'm certainly hesitant to. I certainly balance information, and I think that there's a difference between using an informant and setting people up. I think that if people wouldn't be involved in something but for being trolled by law enforcement, then I just do not think that they should be prosecuted. I think it's different when somebody is setting something up on their own and they're reaching out and law enforcement becomes involved in that way. And we could be talking about a terrorist plot. We could be talking about somebody calling on a group of people to storm the Capitol. I mean, if definitely start using informants there and start listening to them early. But in Richard's case, it was truly unjust. There was a paid informant. He was on the payroll of multiple law enforcement organizations, as was his wife. And this person went from being worth nothing to being worth millions because they were allowed to often keep the proceeds of these setups.
It's sort of shocking that it would be a legal operation.
Oh, well, it's Florida. It's a whole nother world. In the 80s, it's totally another world. So, yeah.
Let's do another podcast on that. Yeah. Well, another follow up with your history as a prosecutor. It sounds like there were situations where sometimes perhaps you might be uncomfortable with a case, and you've said in the past that you actually lacked the ability, the discretion to make changes in sentencing when it came to cannabis. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Why were your hands tied, and what room did you have when you perhaps didn't agree with the approach that the state was taking?
Oh, I had no room. I withheld adjudication once on someone who'd been previously adjudicated because I saw that they were wasting away. I apologized to them. I wish I didn't know what more I could do. I was 25. I'd grown up in Portland where we'd had decrim since 73 of cannabis. And I was so surprised that how Miami treated cannabis, drugs, and many other things. I just thought in this city where there was so much violent crime, like person on person, violent crime against women, why were they so focused on minor drug offenses? It really was perplexing. I really felt like, I was sad every single day. In fact, when I started, I was carpooling with a friend of mine. Her name's Randy. And I would cry in the car every day. I felt like I was getting dressed up, like grown up, to go act, to put on a play, to like act something out before a jury. You're handling hundreds of cases. It's so overwhelming. You have to work with guidelines, with min-mans, and really you don't have a voice because you speak for the people of the state of Florida. And I guess I generally don't agree with the people of this.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it was sad. I mean, on the wall in the courtrooms, there was a sign, and it says, "We who labor here seek only the truth." And I felt like that was a lie. I just felt like
Wow.
there was just there's so many different things that need to be taken into account. There is no one size fits all approach. And I think it's wrong that those who often deserve the most punishment, because perhaps they're in a position of maybe even privilege where there's absolutely no excuse to be hurting people and ruining people, or perhaps an entire nation. Those are the people who get off. And those are the people who get these high paid, high powered legal defense teams. And those are the people who really should be punished the most, not people who go out on a 3 strikes, not people like Bernard Noble, certainly. It's really sad.
So it is. And I really appreciate your vulnerability and talking about this, because I think that I can't speak for other people, but they're questions that I always have. I wonder what prosecutors are thinking and how they view their jobs. And I know you can't speak for everybody, but getting the opportunity to talk to you about this is interesting and meaningful. And I guess the follow-up question is, you're working under this, motto on the wall about seeking truth, and you feel like that's a lie. I mean, how did you come to move to literally the other side of the courtroom and be representing someone like Richard?
Well, I walked out of court the day I found out that I was expecting. I didn't want my child to hear any of the shit that was happening in the
Wow.
courtrooms every day. And I left Florida and traveled really around the globe a lot. I was on the go for a bit, and I just saw I was worried. I was worried about the course of destruction we were on, what was going to happen to one another, what was going to happen to the globe. Of course, I was happy. Obama brought us hope for our future, but we're still worried that our planet's on fire and all of that. But also looking at how people are treated, I really was shocked coming out of Miami that there were communities upon communities everywhere. The effects of the war on drugs are felt not just by those who participate or who are patients, and that's how they participate and are arrested that way, or students and experimenting perhaps, but entire communities devastated, and no attention being paid to the people who needed the most attention paid to them. Not enough services in place for those who needed them the most, yet so much waste and so much entitlement and elitism. It was really kind of hard to shake. So it called for years of deep thought and hanging out in coffee shops. But I decided that I had to make a difference, that I'd been studying, I was always, I was aware of, the war on drugs. I knew the history of the war on drugs, not like I know it now, but I went to the University of Oregon. So you just, psychedelic culture, cannabis culture was not anything new to me. But one day I was on a flight and they announced that they had the death penalty for marijuana. And my child looked at me and she knew what that meant. And I'd always been honest with her, because I think that if you're not honest about whatever it is, whether it's, it's the planet or politics or drugs or sex, your kids will never believe you about anything. So she knew what that meant. And I vowed that we would make a difference. That every single day I was going to do my best to help people who were hurt because of the war on drugs, and specifically those people who were being punished for involvement in cannabis when so many are patients, when so many are trying to help one another, and when an industry is is evolving when one of the oldest professions in the book is somehow becoming a new and exciting industry. And I believe that those who are involved and those who are benefiting from plant medicine and from cannabis need to be investing on those who paved the road, in those who participated in the original market and paid the price and continue to pay the price. I think that it's morally objectionable and unethical to operate as a business who doesn't recognize where we all, as in like lovers of Mary Jane, came from and who has been there all along. I think it's wrong. And I also think that regulation that leaves behind craft cannabis operators and those who don't want to participate in big MSOs, maybe they just want to have a farmer's market stand. Well, we need to think about them every day. They matter. Their voice matters so just as much as those whose voices have been dominant on the Hill.
Well, that's a really, really great transition into sort of a look forward at where we're going, because recent changes, as we were recording this, the Democrats now hold all levers of power. Real change could potentially happen, and we've seen pushes on the federal level for cannabis legislation, most recently the MORE Act, and I guess the large question that I have for you is I did an interview a couple of months ago with Andrew D'Angelo, who's also with the Last Prisoner Project. And one thing we talked about was this focus on expungements and how a lot of states have some sort of vehicle or really headline processes that will allow people to get convictions off of their record. But no state currently has retroactive release for prisoners who are serving time for cannabis, as far as I understand it. And I guess what concerns me with some of the legislation, I'll admit that I've not read all of the MORE Act, but the language around actual release, people, having having prisoner sentences looked at and potentially released for something that would suddenly no longer be illegal. I guess a couple of questions there. Firstly, do you think that perhaps there's a misconception where some people actually think that expungement means releasing people from prison?
Wow, that's a good question. I mean, probably some people,
because I've
anything
talked to a few people where I have gotten the sense that they think expungement means that we're going to let prisoners out of prison. And now Illinois has done that, like they have looked and overturned cases, but not everybody. And so the question is, if it's undefined, can we trust it to happen?
No, we can't trust it to happen. And we also can't go back and recalculate all of those guidelines where sentences were based and all of the pleas that were based on guidelines or minmans that took into account cannabis convictions. It's like that would be, we should, but I just can't even imagine how that could happen.
Really?
It's just, yeah. When you plus, like, let's just look at the fact that merely an encounter with the system because of cannabis for some people is a gateway into the system. Cannabis
Absolutely.
is certainly not a gateway drug, it's an exit. But any sort of encounter with the system is not a good thing, especially for a young person. And the effects in the past for students who were caught with even minor amounts or even with paraphernalia, it could mean losing your student loans. How do we go back and recalculate the effects that's had on people's lives? So that's, losing your loans. That's not going to prison, although it could be afterwards when, my goodness, I mean, it's impossible. No one's going to go back and recalculate it all. But what we can do at a minimum is let people out who are serving because of in states where it has been legalized, who are serving for minor drug offenses.
Absolutely. And I suppose the question is, I think that the industry, media, in the industry, as well as activists and people pushing for this, do have, I've sort of made it a bit of a point to highlight that distinction as much as I can, because I think that expungements are sort of the bare minimum, and there's still problems even there. People are often financially required to, there's money involved with getting an expungement repealed sometimes, and it can be a complicated process that requires people to go to court or miss work. So there's still a lot of work to do. But I guess the question for you is, how do people who support helping people like Richard, who want people who are currently serving to get a fair shake at having their sentence looked at, what can they do? Is it just about writing legislators, making it clear to people that this is something that's important? How does the average person sort of voice their opinion if they're a consumer and maybe perhaps worried about the injustice that still exists?
Well, absolutely. Contacting their electeds is something everybody
Mm-hmm.
can be doing and should be doing. And we're all at home and with on the computers more than ever, as are our electeds and staffers. So we can definitely be reaching out. There are many different nonprofits who have direct action centers. Some of the brightest minds out there are with Students for Sensible Drug Policy, and they have great actions, direct actions, as well as normal. So, National Organization for the Reform
Mm-hmm.
of Marijuana Laws. So, there are groups out there who are doing good work, and through them, if you are on, let's say, their email, then they'll let you know of ways that you can easily contact your electeds. They'll have, forms you can fill out. It really is not too difficult. Numbers to call. So you can do that, or just do it on your own. Know who you voted for. They work for you. Call them up. Be heard. We need reform. We need it now, and we need to get out our elderly, nonviolent, cannabis and psychedelic prisoners of conscience. Now more than ever, while we have a pandemic that is ravaging our prisons. We obviously care
Yeah.
about these people the least. We
Yeah.
deprive them of their rights. We subject them to what is essentially slavery in the prison industrial complex. The least we can do is help out some old people. Like, come on, seriously.
Mm. So this is kind of a tough question, and it's fine to say that, it's complicated and it's going to depend, on your local area. But you talked about how, as a prosecutor, you felt that your job was to sort of be the voice of the citizens of Florida, or the people of that state. If people make their voices loud and make it clear to prosecutors, to electeds, that this is how they want things done, and they want this change and a more compassionate drug policy, will people listen? Like, is it possible to make those sorts of changes by placing institutional pressure, or are there some things that are going to take, perhaps structural change?
Well, both. I think
Mm.
that we've seen a real need for structural change in our country. But when it comes to policy change, I'm certainly more hopeful today than I was a few days ago. I
Hmm.
am excited to see what happens in the 117th. I think that we're going to see, hopefully, some good changes when it comes to cannabis. I'm a little bit afraid, a little bit afraid. Let's just wait and see. I think we're going to see good changes when it comes to psychedelic policy. I think there has been some great research out there, and MAPS has been definitely doing some great work. I'm part of an organization called the Psychedelic Justice League, which is part of the larger Psychedelic Defense Fund. And in the Psychedelic Justice League, we're working specifically to help people who are incarcerated because they are prisoners of conscience and consumers of psychedelics, as well as change policy. So there are, I think that, now's the time for that. I think we need to learn to pay attention to lessons we've learned from cannabis and from the regulation. It hasn't been successful, like truly, truly, truly successful in a state yet. Not when we're ignoring all of the social justice issues, not when there are so many barriers to enter the market, not when there aren't pathways to participate from those who've suffered because of the war on drugs and because of their involvement being experts in these industries. So I think that we need to learn our lessons from other states. I think that I'm very hopeful that we'll see change when it comes to criminal justice. Absolutely. I think that how can we not at this point? When I was a toddler, we had, I believe, 4 or 5% of the total global population of incarcerated population, and now it's just a quarter. A quarter of the entire global incarcerated population is in the United States. When I was little, it was 350,000 when I was a toddler. So there's been some changes that haven't been so good. I think we're going to see positive changes when it comes to investing in people. I think that when we invest in people, we will downstream see beautiful things happen in our country. Instead, we've just been criminalizing behavior and punishing people. We haven't been investing in our people. We haven't been investing in education. We haven't been investing in social services that people truly need. We haven't been investing in the mental health of our country, and it's about time. It's long overdue. I think we need to see a structural shift. I think we need to see, in many cases, an examination and redistribution of resources. And I think we need to start treating each other with dignity and respect. And I think we need to hold those who are guilty of crimes against our country responsible, like what we saw happen when people stormed the Capitol because someone told them to.
So one last quick question here, and we're running out of time, so I appreciate you hanging with me. We have our incoming vice president, as a former prosecutor, Kamala Harris, has, it seems, a very good insight into the issues that we've been discussing, and a real integrity when it comes to talking about change. Someone who can advocate for change, I think, with some weight behind her words because of her experience. That being said, I think there's still some questions about where exactly she'll fall. And her record is something that, some progressives are worried about. I guess the question is there a conversation between prosecutors, former prosecutors? Is there some way to perhaps articulate these concerns to the vice president through, do prosecutors in some way have like an avenue here to perhaps make a case for sweeping changes?
Well, you know what? I should call her up, former prosecutor to former prosecutor, and ask her onto this high tea show I do for Oaksterdam, which is a cannabis.
That would be incredible.
And it is in her neighborhood. Kamala knows Oakland. Kamala knows the Oaksterdam area and how cannabis can really be a positive thing for communities when we start embracing cannabis and embracing people who make decisions for their bodies and for wellness instead of criminalizing them. She's seen what positive effects it has. So I'd like to think that Kamala is would like to sit down and have some tea. I'm head of government over at Oaksterdam University, and at Oaksterdam, they believe in helping our local communities, and Kamala is the local community. I'd like to think that she'll represent the people of the Bay well, that she'll represent the interests of her voters, because that's the thing. When you're an elected official, you can believe all you want about certain issues, but you represent the people, and we the people need to be heard. We must demand to be heard, and I believe that Kamala will listen to the will of the people. And if the will of the people is to decarcerate and to have radical drug policy reform, I'd like to think that she'll listen and be a positive voice in this White House for the next 4 years until she's elected president. And I think we'll see some great changes in 2024.
Chiara Juster is a former prosecutor. She is a lawyer with a focus on social justice, decarceration, drug policy. She's also a co-founder of the Psychedelic Justice League. Chiara, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a beautiful day.
You can find more cannabis industry reporting at TRICHOMES.com, as well as more great shows like this one. If you're a member of the cannabis community and you have a story you want to share with us, reach out. You can reach the show at highground at TRICHOMES.com. Please take a second to subscribe to the podcast and write a review. It really helps others find the show. You can also join the discussion with industry insiders and get your voice heard by joining the community at TRICHOMES.com and following us on all social media. The show is produced by David Fortin. I'm Jesse Betend, and thank you for listening.